These stories shouldn't be told. Some people who have tried to speak out have disappeared. If you keep watching, you'd better make sure you're not next. Subscribe now, just in case. The Deadline Killer. The phone rang for the first time at 2:13 a.m. Detective Daniel Vasquez, a veteran of the homicide department, woke up startled. His cell phone, forgotten on the nightstand, was vibrating insistently. The number was unknown. Hello? His voice was hoarse from sleep. Silence. The only thing he heard on the other end was heavy breathing. Something slow, almost calculated. Daniel frowned and repeated, "Who's there?" Nothing. For a moment he thought he heard a background noise, a dry crack like wood creaking, followed by something more muffled, a distant murmur. Before he could say anything else, the call dropped. He stared at the phone. No messages, no notifications, just that strange feeling crawling down his spine. The next morning, Daniel was called to a new crime scene. A woman had been found dead in her apartment, her eyes wide in a silent scream. The body was lying on the floor, next to a landline phone still off the hook. The forensics determined that she had died from asphyxiation, but with no signs of struggle or forced entry. The most disturbing part? The last call made from the victim's phone had occurred at exactly 2:13 a.m., the same time as the mysterious call Daniel had received. The coincidence bothered the detective, but he tried to push the idea away. Cases are not solved with paranoia. However, when the second death occurred, the coincidence became a pattern. 3 days later, another body was found, a man, strangled in his own office. Again, the phone next to the victim was off the hook, and the last call recorded was at 2:13 a.m. This time, Daniel rushed to his phone records. His heart froze when he confirmed that on that same night, he had also received an anonymous call at the same time. The killer was playing with him. Determined to discover the origin of the calls, Daniel contacted the operator, but the answer he received made his stomach sink. "Detective, that's not possible. There were no calls registered to your number at those times." He felt cold sweat trickle down his neck. How could someone make a call without leaving a trace? By this point, the news was already talking about a serial killer. The press nicknamed him the Deadline Killer. But Daniel knew that the story was even more disturbing than any sensational headline could describe. The detective decided to act before another body appeared. He assembled a team to track unknown calls in the city. But the following morning, his phone rang again. He answered with bated breath. This time, there was no silence. A male voice, hoarse and slow, whispered, "Detective, are you listening to me?" Daniel froze. "Who are you?" he asked, trying to stay calm. The man chuckled softly, as if amused by the fear in the policeman's voice. Then he spoke the words that made Daniel's blood run cold. "Look out the window!" The detective instinctively turned and pulled back the curtain. His house was surrounded by buildings, and the night was dark. But then he saw it. In the building across the street, an immobile silhouette was standing on the fourth-floor balcony, looking directly at him. The call dropped. Daniel pulled out his gun and ran downstairs. In less than 3 minutes, he burst into the building and climbed to the indicated floor. But when he broke down the door to the apartment, he found the place empty. There was no furniture, clothes, or any sign of habitation, just a rotary phone on the dusty floor. The digital display was blinking, showing the time 2:13 a.m. That's when the phone rang. Daniel, with the gun trembling in his hands, answered. "What do you want from me?" he shouted. The heavy breathing returned, accompanied by an almost indecipherable murmur. But this time he could hear clearly. A single phrase was whispered, "You're next." The call dropped. The next day, the city woke up to shocking news. Another murder. The victim, Daniel Vasquez, a police detective, found dead in his own apartment. The crime scene was identical to the previous ones. The phone was off the hook. The last call recorded was made at 2:13 a.m., but there was an even more terrifying detail. The coroner estimated that Daniel was already dead before the last call was made. No one ever discovered who the Deadline Killer was. And to this day, there are reports of police officers receiving mysterious calls in the middle of the night, always at 2:13 a.m. And when they answer, they hear only heavy breathing on the other end of the line. The case of the bone rituals. The first body was found in a vacant lot on the outskirts of the city, arranged in a bizarre way. The skin had deep marks, and the bones were carefully arranged in a perfect circle around the carcass. In the center, a human skull adorned with melted candles seemed to observe the investigators with empty eyes. Detective Arthur Vasconcelos, a veteran of the homicide unit, looked at the scene with a mixture of fascination and horror. It wasn't the first time he had seen a brutal crime, but something in that ritualistic arrangement made his skin crawl. The air around seemed dense, charged with something he couldn't explain. When the forensics finalized the analysis, another disturbing discovery emerged. The bones were engraved with archaic symbols, which seemed to be part of a code or a forgotten language. The detective sought experts to try to decipher the writings, but the answers he got were disturbing. The symbols were linked to ancient rituals that believed in the transmigration of the soul through mysterious ceremonies. Days passed, and new bodies were found, always following the same unusual pattern. The city panicked. Newspapers printed terrifying headlines about a mysterious cult, while the police desperately tried to find any clue about the criminal. But there were no fingerprints, no traces. It was as if the perpetrator simply emerged from nowhere and disappeared into the wind. The investigation led Arthur to an abandoned house on the outskirts of the city, where, according to reports, strange chants could be heard at night. Upon entering the ruined residence, he found a basement hidden under a secret passage. What he saw there made his blood run cold, an altar surrounded by dozens of black candles. On the floor, wax marks indicated that something had happened there recently. In the center of the altar, a mask made of carved wood rested on an old, worn book. Arthur flipped through the pages, trembling, trying to understand the extent of the mystery that lay before him. The texts described in detail the steps of ancient rituals and mentioned a name: the one who walks among the bones. He felt a presence approaching, as if he was being watched. The candlelight flickered violently, and for a moment shadows moved on their own on the walls. He ran out of the house, but from that night on something changed. Nightmares invaded his dreams, always showing hooded figures mumbling around a circle of bones. And every morning, he woke up with small signs of scratches on his skin, as if something was trying to communicate with him while he slept. The investigation was closed without a solution. No suspect was found, and the incident ceased as abruptly as they began. But Arthur knew that something remained lurking. Every night he heard whispers in his house, and in his mirror, marks began to appear that he didn't remember making, always drawing the same symbols found on the bones of the victims. The case was archived, but the mystery never really ended. Apartment 405. The building was in the center of the city, an old and dark building marked by stories of unexplained disappearances. Apartment 405 was the epicenter of all the mysteries. Every resident who lived there simply disappeared, leaving only untouched belongings and doors locked from the inside. The police never managed to understand how or why. Detective Renato Albuquerque was assigned to investigate the case. A skeptic by nature, he believed that everything had a rational explanation. To solve the mystery, he decided to spend a night in the apartment. The moment he crossed the door, he felt the heavy air and an inexplicable cold. The furniture was intact, as if someone had just left. But something was wrong. The mirror on the wall reflected an environment slightly different from the real one. As the night wore on, Renato began to hear strange sounds. First distant whispers, then footsteps in the hallway. The detective checked the door, but it remained locked. The sound was coming from inside the apartment. His gaze turned to the mirror. The image now showed a figure with its back turned, paralyzed in the corner of the room. Renato spun on his heels, but there was nothing there. When he looked back at the mirror, the figure was facing him, faceless, just an empty shadow. The light flickered, and the next thing Renato realized was that he was lying on the floor. His cell phone read 3:15 a.m. He felt exhausted, as if he had slept for hours. But when he tried to leave, he noticed something terrifying. The apartment now looked different, as if it were in a state of disrepair, covered in dust and with cracked walls. He tried to open the door, but the lock wouldn't budge. The mirror was the only clean surface in the place. He approached hesitantly and saw the reflection of the apartment as it was before, modern and intact. And in the reflection, he saw himself sleeping on the floor, still inside the other apartment. Renato desperately knocked on the mirror, calling for help. But on the other side, his reflection opened its eyes and smiled. Before he could scream, everything went dark. The next morning, the building was silent. Apartment 405 remained closed and locked. No sign of the detective. The investigation was archived like the previous cases, but those who look closely at the apartment's mirror swear they see a shadow watching, waiting for the next unsuspecting soul to enter. The painter of the victims. The first painting appeared in an independent gallery in the city center. It was an incredibly detailed scene, depicting a woman in her living room, her eyes wide in terror, her expression frozen in a silent scream. Few noticed the piece until the next evening's news. The woman in the painting had been found dead in her home, in the same position, with the same expression of horror. Detective Elias Brando was assigned to the case. A veteran of the police, he had seen terrible things in his career, but nothing like that. The painting, dated 3 days before the murder, indicated prior knowledge of the events. The artist was not registered. He signed only as SM. As Elias investigated, other paintings began to emerge. Each one represented a new death scene, and, in a few days, a new body was found. The victims seemed to have no connection to each other, but they were all portrayed in their last moments with a haunting realism. The detective managed to track down a gallery that received the paintings from an anonymous supplier. When he finally obtained an address, he went to an abandoned building on the outskirts. The place was filled with unfinished canvases, each showing someone who was still alive, including a self-portrait of Elias. The detective's heart raced. Whoever SM was, he already knew that Elias would find him. But before he could leave the place, the door closed on its own. In the oppressive silence, he heard a brush gliding over a canvas. He looked towards the sound and saw the painting being finished before his eyes. In it was him, with the same terrified look as the previous victims. The next morning, the detective's body was found in the same position as in his painting. The signature of SM was scrawled on his chest. The investigations continued, but the artist was never found. His paintings disappeared from the gallery, except for one left anonymously at the police station door, a portrait of the next target, still unknown. And, as before, it was only a matter of time until death followed art. The Whispering Child. The call came into the station at 2:47 a.m. A child's voice trembled on the other end of the line. "Hello? There's someone here? He's watching me." The operator tried to get more information, but the call dropped. The tracking identified the address. An abandoned house in the suburbs, unoccupied for over 20 years. Even so, a patrol car was dispatched. Officers Vasconcelos and Andrade entered the property and found dust, covered furniture, and an old phone off the hook in the living room. There were no signs of a child, just an inexplicable cold and a smell of mold permeating the air. As they inspected the place, they heard a faint noise coming from upstairs, like footsteps dragging across rotten wood. Vasconcelos pulled out his flashlight and slowly climbed the stairs, each step creaking under his weight. Upon reaching the hallway, he saw a door ajar. When he pushed it open, he felt a chill run down his spine. The room was empty, but in the center of the floor, a dirty teddy bear lay abandoned. On the dusty mirror, there was a message written with small fingers. "He won't let me go." Andrade called Vasconcelos from the living room. The phone had started ringing again. The policeman answered with bated breath. "Hello? Who's speaking?" This time, The child's voice came clearer but full of despair. "He's coming!" The call dropped again. The phone remained disconnected from the main line. Vasconcelos decided to check the station's files and discovered an old case. A girl named Sofia had disappeared there decades before. Her mother, in despair, had said that her daughter spoke of a man in the wall who whispered to her at night. Shortly after, Sofia disappeared without a trace. In the following days, the same call happened again. Always the same childish whisper, always the same plea for help. The detective, increasingly intrigued, decided to return to the house alone. He took a recorder to document any abnormal sounds. As he investigated the place, he felt a chill run down his spine. A faint noise echoed through the environment, like a child's breath. He turned on his flashlight and noticed that the mirror upstairs was fogged up, as if someone had just breathed there. Suddenly, the recorder fell from his hands and turned off on its own. Upon listening to the recording later, he froze. Among the static and noise, a weak voice whispered, "He's still here. He won't let me leave." The next morning, Vasconcelos noticed something strange on his desk at the station. The teddy bear from the abandoned room was there, stained with dust and with a torn seam. Inside it, there was a note yellowed with time, with a single phrase scrawled, "He found me. Now he's coming after you." The investigation was closed due to lack of concrete evidence, but the station's operators still receive calls from a child asking for help, and those who pass by the abandoned house swear they hear a faint whisper coming from the phone, even though it is not connected to any line. Some say that if you answer, you can hear your own voice calling for help from the other side.